All right. So we'll start the class. And so for those who have not been able to catch up on everything, we're going to start in Job 22 tonight with Eliphaz. His last, this will be the last time we hear from Eliphaz. We remember that he is the elder friend. We would assume he speaks the most. And of course, at this point, lots of things are being said, which is what happens after a course of time with the same conversation. And nobody really has the facts, nobody really has the full knowledge. And so there's just a lot of speculation and assumptions being made at this point. So we're going to saddle up and we're going to do the last round. Hopefully next week we'll finish the third round of in this conversation that Job has with his friends. And then we'll just have the young man Elihu and then the words of God to look at. I think I've sent the lessons out. Hopefully everybody's been able to keep up, but if not, certainly the lessons are there, and they'll also be on a Shared Inheritance website soon. I got to get the young women to help me with that. All right, so here we go. So Zophar is done. We don't hear from him again. He's the last of the friends to speak. Bildad will have probably about a text of about 6 verses left after tonight, but we're going to look at these final words. So Eliphaz is going to continue to speak general truth, and all of them get a lot of things right. And I know we tend to want to be hard on Job's friends. You know, Job has gone through a lot, but they all speak some general truths. They just don't apply to this situation. Something that we might be guilty of ourselves if we're not careful, right? We tend to do that too. He insinuates here that because Job has complained in his afflictions, that he assumes that Job thinks God's unjust. And that's kind of the insinuation here. Now, we've also seen them also assume that Job is guilty of sin or unrighteousness and therefore has been afflicted. So we've looked at that too. There's been a lot of that conversation. Yeah. Job's going to combat a little bit of that again tonight. But so we understand this feeling of not understanding why life happens like it does. And we get this, you know, and we can get ourselves wrapped around the axle ourselves if we're not careful in just having faith and trusting God, which is what they're figuring out here. But what he says in these verses, so ever true, that when God does us good, it is not because he owes us or is indebted to us. So let's start here with the first verses here in this chapter. Oops, go back. All right. And Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, can a man be profitable to God? Though he who is wise may be profitable to himself. Is it any pleasure to the Almighty that you are righteous? Or is it gain to him that you make your ways blameless? Is it because of your fear of him that he corrects you and enters into judgment with you? And so, you know, he talks about how God doesn't owe men good, that it's not that he's indebted to us. Man, even the most righteous, the most honest, the most obedient, does not make God a debtor to him in his godliness. We can't make ourselves profitable to God. Our piety and our wisdoms are profitable for us, and that's what he says here. It can be profitable for you. The gains of such goodness, to be wise, to be religious, they're profitable for us, but not so to God necessarily. God doesn't need profit. He is all things and in all things complete, and that helps us gain some perspective. 1 Timothy 4, verse 8, godliness is profitable for all things, for our benefit. And so they help us in our desire to be perfected. God does not require perfection. He is perfection. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but walking in the light doesn't mean that we are perfect, but that we are walking righteously before God because he perfects us as we walk. The sad thing for Job in these conversations really is it is true. God didn't owe Job anything, even an answer. And Job's continued faith in God was profitable for him, but it wasn't profitable for God. I mean, that's what we learn, is that God strengthens us in our afflictions. We know that in Hebrews, we know that God punishes like a father punishes for the good of the child. Eliphaz points to the source of the punishment being reaped upon Job. Sarcastically, he really just kind of tells him off. He says, don't you know that when God restrains us or rebukes us, it is not because he fears us or is in danger of us or is jealous of us? We must consider that all we really know is that God rebukes the good because he loves them. He never rebukes the great because he fears them. And Job will talk about that. There are a lot of great men that live in this life, deceiving everyone, and they're never rebuked. They die peaceful deaths with great praise. And so that is not what happens in life. God does not enter into judgment of man. He doesn't quarrel with men or seek out judgment on earth because they threaten or oppose him. He doesn't do it. They can talk, they can rage against him on earth. They can say there is no God, and God does not punish in that way while they are on earth. That's what earthly kings do, but that is not what God does. God does not punish necessarily on the earth. He goes on to say, is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? For you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given the weary water to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. But the mighty man possessed the land, and the honorable man dwelt in it. You have sent widows away empty, and the strength of the fatherless was crushed. Therefore snares are all around you, and sudden fear troubles you, or darkness so that you cannot see, and an abundance of water covers you. Is not God in the height of heaven? And see the highest stars, how lofty they are? And you say, what does God know? Can he judge through the deep darkness? Thick clouds cover him so that he cannot see, and he walks above the circle of heaven. Okay, this is an outrageous piece of this text.
It is.
Yeah. It is outrageous. So, up to this point, Eliphaz and Job's friends had accused Job in a very general way as a wicked man or as hypocritical. Obviously, Job, you aren't what you appeared to be. That's what they've said in the past, that God would not have done this to you if you really were who you appeared to be. Now, Eliphaz is going to bring direct, exact charges against Job, charges that are false. And I think this is an interesting thing, but this is an interesting thing. I will tell you, I have heard conversations where somebody will work their way into something like this, to where finally they just start making accusations that are not so about somebody. It starts out, well, why is this happening and what is going on? And, and then it grows and it grows and it grows until we have accusations made about people that are not true based off of the fact that we are making assumptions of a general truth. It happens all the time. And now Job's friends have worked themselves into this. How deep a hole of nonsense and lack of reasoning we find ourselves when we do not rely on faith, when we lack knowledge. We get ourselves into these deep holes when we do not have faith, when we just simply lack the knowledge. There are just so many things we don't know. I mean, God himself has told us, you cannot even begin to think like me. Your ways are not my ways. Your thoughts are not my thoughts. He tells us in the Psalms that we don't even know the hymn. We don't even understand the very littlest minute details. And yet we will work ourselves into assuming things because we don't have the faith to lack the knowledge. My lesson that I have to give in a few weeks is on the lack of knowledge. We're at the lectures, it's about the minor prophets. I've thought a lot about the lesson because the older I get, the less I know. I mean, the knowledge that is being discussed by the minor prophets is not whether or not they can name the judges. I've got that one down. It's not whether or not you can tell the days of creation. It's not even about naming or quoting scripture. We lack so much knowledge, as did Job's friends, and we must rely on our faith. So this would be a great sin that Eliphaz would be guilty of because he speaks without understanding. And it has to be a lesson to us as we evaluate and assume circumstances of others without patience and without true knowledge. We can easily discourage. We can easily get it wrong. How will now, in his inability to understand, how will he now draw these harmful and unrighteous conclusions to the circumstances that have, by the way, had very little effect on him? Do you know everything that has happened to Job has really not affected these friends, not in the truest sense in their lives? Not really. I mean, they're sad for their friend, and, but they haven't lost anything. And actually, the things that he's going to discuss are not their business, nor has he ever seen this happen. You ever think about these friends who were only vaguely affected? They could walk away. They would go home. They could walk away and tell tales of the terrible fate of a friend. They've still got full stomachs. They've still got their family. They're still healthy. They're still respected. We really need to consider ourselves as we speak of others. We don't want to veil our motives by claiming that we love. God counted the words of these friends as sin. They are not even worthy to offer their own sacrifices before him because of their unholy hands and hearts. In fact, they were just as guilty and had done just as much damage as the Chaldeans and Sabians who had robbed and killed.
They did with their words.
That's right, because their words were so harmful. So Job in these verses is accused of oppression. He's accused of injustice. He's accused of being rich and having so much good that his power and his wealth, he's hurt others and harmed a great deal. That he had been cruel and unmerciful to the poor, that he had been partial in his to the rich and great, that he was an atheist and did not fear God, and that he misuses God's doctrine. That is what he's accused of. We have gone from them coming to comfort and counsel a man who has lost everything, who is sick, who is ill, who is plagued, whose wife has given up her faith and security in God. And now they've accused him of these wrongs. And Job will try to defend himself a little later on, but I can't imagine that these words don't live on for both Eliphaz and Job as they live their lives in the coming years. He concludes that what is happening is the providence of God that will get cross and embarrass such behavior, that God is embarrassing Job and humbling him. He draws the conclusion that the conscience will terrify and accuse one of such behavior, that the one who behaves as such, that their own minds will eat at them. That is not necessarily true, by the way. People can be really mean and really harsh and really ugly in this life and never, ever, ever think about it. And he concludes that the behavior brings ones to their knees, that they're bewildered and amazed and they don't know what to do. And that is not always the case either. So it is just easier for Eliphaz to attribute what he doesn't understand to sin. And sometimes we will just not allow for mystery, for miracle, for providence, for intervention of God. He refers to the position of God in the heavens, and yet does not really consider that position. God's up there watching him. God's hearing everything Eliphaz is saying too. He probably needed to consider that for himself, yet he proves the position that no man is profitable to one who sits in the heavens. He wraps himself around the axle for the lack of understanding, because the reasoning is earthly and the reason is heavenly. He's trying to reason with earthly wisdoms when the reason for what is happening is a heavenly motive. And we just can't do that. Our incomplete knowledge must bring us to a complete faith. Job will later talk about, I don't know what's happening, but I trust in the Lord. And that's really what this is about. We must know that God is able to manage it all without our words, without our intervention, without our assumptions, without our judgment. We don't have to judge everything. We don't have to speculate everything. We just have to encourage. Later on in the lesson, one of the things I thought about was, James tells us to hold up the holy hand, to hold up the hands of those who are weak. And I picture these friends holding his hands up and screaming in his face while they are assisting him in his weakness. And we are sometimes guilty of that. We hold up the hands of the weak and we accuse them of things that they should not be accused of. We will keep to the old way, which wicked men have trod, who were cut down before their time, whose foundations were swept away by the, to the old way, which wicked men have trod, who were cut down before their time, whose foundation was swept away by the flood. So now he's going to compare Job to the men during the flood. This is incredible. They said to God, depart from us. What can the Almighty do to them? Yet he filled their houses with good things, but the counsel of the wicked was far from them. The righteous see it and are glad, and the innocent laugh at them. Surely our adversaries are cut down, and the fire consumes their remnants. It is interesting to think about Job and all of his friends and all the men who lived having the real knowledge of the flood, which is certainly the reference here, and quite possibly, and I think significantly, Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, if we place Job at the time of Abraham, it is very likely that Job could have known either people affected by that fire, or I don't know that God didn't burn other cities down that are not recorded, but certainly Job had knowledge of those events that God had punished. Eliphaz has now laid out Job's sins. He's put them in order. He's established the exacts about them, right? He now is going to try to awaken him to understanding of his misery and the dangerous reasons for the sin. And he does this by comparing Job to the sinners at the time of the flood, or of those consumed by the fire, probably Sodom. He will remind Job that God had punished before. The flood and the fire, clearly seen, was the wrath of God upon his creation. Remember, says Eliphaz, this had happened before, and you're not the first that God has punished for sin. Can you imagine Job being compared to the victims of the flood, or to Sodom and Gomorrah, him knowing the story so well? It's a good warning for the wrong man. That's the problem. Remember, taken before their time to die, the Almighty cut them off. He says to this good man, you remember them. They had houses that were full. They had the blessings from the Lord. They were drinking, they were eating, they were working, carrying on with their life until the day of wrath. Just like you, Job. Why are you surprised? That's what he's saying here. Your sin has brought you to this place. This man who offered a sacrifice to God each morning for him and his family is now being compared to those who had forgotten God for days without end. These are accounts that Job knew well himself. It is possible that he even lived in the days when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. It could have been contemporary to his time. Now acquaint yourself with him and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. So he's going to give some actually excellent advice, which these men do because they've got it in them, right? I mean, I actually think in many ways, and this is probably the 5th or 6th time I've taught the book of Job, but every time I teach it, I think about different things, and probably because I'm getting old. But I actually wonder if the book of Job is more relevant to us by consideration of what the friends say than it is in the consideration of the afflictions of Job. Now, certainly we're all afflicted. None of us probably ever will experience what Job did, though. But this and these words and this trying to figure out life and all the injustices and everything that's happening, this is what we do in our heads all the time. And so we have to be very careful. Now acquaint yourself with him and be at peace. So he says, okay, just do this. Get back to him. Oh, wait, did I? Oh, I did skip one. I'm sorry. So this is a really good slide. Sorry. I'm going to go forward. Okay. Now acquaint yourself with him and be at peace. Thereby, good will come. Well, it's a nice thought, isn't it? Actually, this is the evangelical message of our day. I often say this is really it. You want to watch a TV evangelist who asks you for money, and if you just give money, good things will come. That is not a biblical principle. It is not what God promises. I think good things come when we come to God and when we associate ourselves with in the fellowship with the saints, and we find out that we have families, and all of those good things come in the plan of God. But God does not make that promise. He never has. He never will. In fact, in the New Testament, it says you come to Christ with everything you are. You give him everything you are, and it's not going to change. It's not going to change your nationality. It's not going to change your skin color. It's not going to change your job. It's not going to change anything other than the fact that you will have an understanding of him. You'll have all the spiritual blessings that come. Now acquaint yourself with him, be at peace. Therefore, good will come. Receive, please, instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. You will remove iniquity far from your tents. Then you will lay your gold in the dust and your gold of Ophir among the stones of the brooks. Yes, the Almighty will be your gold and your silver. For then you will have your delight in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You will make your prayer to him and he will hear you, and you will pay your vows. You will also declare a thing and it will be established for you. So light will shine on your ways. And when they cast you down and say exaltation will come, then he will save the humble person. He will even deliver one who is not innocent. Yes, he will be delivered by the purity of your hands. So one more time, this is the final words of Eliphaz. We're almost there to put him to rest. And in goodness, we almost want to forgive this dear friend of Job for such good advice. And in fact, it is very wise counsel. Always find yourself in communion with God. That's what he's saying here. His counsel is good, were it not that the circumstances had been so drastically misunderstood. He's going to encourage Job to hope. That's what this is about. He's laid before Job and the others the miserable condition of the wicked man in order to bring him back to God, though he had never wandered away. And now he shows him the happiness of those that repent. And there's a lot of truths in what he says. He says, acquaint yourself with God. Join yourself with him. The position of all who are afflicted, especially when we are afflicted, we draw near to God. One of my favorite parts of Psalm 119, which I love. Were it not for my afflictions, I would not know you the way that I do. The words here indicate that Job should not be in opposition to God, who would and could work good. Don't be a stranger to him. Draw to him. Get knowledge and understanding from him. That is what is being discussed here. Be at peace, he says. Don't fret. Don't worry. Don't be uneasy. Don't be confused. Let not your heart be troubled, Jesus tells his apostles in John 14 when they're concerned about him leaving them. You don't need to be confused. Christians are not those that run around anxious and fretting. It's not the nature of what the joy and the hope brings us. And when we run around in turmoil, when we should have a quiet and calm, well-composed spirit, we don't have that light that we need. Be at peace both with God and man. Be reconciled to God, lest we carry on an unholy war within ourselves, wrought with conflict and criticism and bitterness and anxiety. Amos 3:3 tells us that how can two walk together except they agree? Do you ever think about that when you're fraught with anxiety? It is impossible for God to walk in such a way. It is impossible. He cannot. We're not joined with God when our spirit is at angst. we must not deceive ourselves. He's not a partner to such. Receive the law of his mouth. Submit to his way, his will, his government, his rule. Be maintained and ruled by his laws and his ways. We receive our being and our maintenance from God. He is our health. He is our IV, our lifeline. His law is what we ask. It's like Paul on the road to Damascus in Acts 9, when he was face to face with Christ. All he had left to say is, what will you do with me? What should I do? We cling to God's instructions. I don't know how Job received his instructions in the law at that time. This is a hard time for us. It's a patriarchal time that it's hard for us to understand exactly how the law was received, but I will tell you, he knew it, and his duty was to respond to it, as it has been throughout the ages. Lay up his word in your heart. It's not enough to just receive the word. We must retain it. We must lay it up. Look at that phrase, lay it up. It's something you do with a treasure. You know, you hide your jewelry, you hide your things that are valuable to you because you don't want them taken away from you. That's the terminology here, that we lay it up, that we keep it as if it's a treasure. It has great value. We keep it safe. It must be important enough to guard so that we're ready to use it whenever we desperately need it. It is in the heart that makes it the natural tool that we go to when we don't have our Bibles with us. And by the way that you do this is you cling to your Bible. I mean, I've often thought that if I keep my Bible near where I know where it is, because I would hate to lose it in a fire, because I depend upon it. It's the treasure. It's what we lay up. Return to the Almighty. Don't only turn from sin. Don't just say, I'm going to quit doing this, but draw near to God. It's a twofold process. It's an action. We go home to him, is what this is really talking about. We return to him so that you reach him, and your reformation causes you to cling to him. Put away the iniquity far from you. Keep sin far away. Don't play with it. Do not compromise. Don't try to walk that fine line. Do you know, I run into Christian women my age that still want to be a little bit cool. It is not funny. It is not funny. It is not appropriate, and it's not attractive, by the way. We don't play with the world. God doesn't intend for us to have those types of attitudes. It's okay to be square if you don't know that by now. It's all right. Don't be slack. Diligently remove the sin. It's an action. So that the thought is, for Eliphaz, he promotes the fact that then his estate will improve, that he would prosper, that temporal things might be bestowed abundantly upon him. But he also gives promises of godliness. It is interesting about Eliphaz because he does speak of spiritual blessings that will come to Job. And I tend to be one that thinks that things do work out. I don't think everybody needs to be rich. I don't think everybody has to, but I do believe that God's people, in their process of walking righteously, do receive the best things of earth as well. But he talks about being rich, that thou shalt lay up gold as dust in such abundance, in plenty, in silver, restoring what was lost. Job has been rich. Eliphaz suggests that perhaps his riches were gone from fraud or from oppression, unwilling to share or to do good. But just return to God and you will have wealth. Job later will argue that that is not what the true riches are. True riches are from God. He talks about him being safe, where men's riches usually expose them to dangers. Now his riches, provided by God, would be his defense. And in many ways that is true, that both knowledge and wisdoms help for one to be good stewards, that our life and our livelihood is kept safe. But I think this is also talking about safety in our prayers, that there is spiritual safety that is involved, that he would live complacent with God. Now we're getting to into some real spiritual concepts, that his soul may be enriched, that God became both the riches and the securities in his life, that he is our wealth, he is our defense, he is our dignity and our delight, that he should be humble and have holy confidence in God. We then have great confidence in our walk. 1 John 3:21 says, if our heart does not condemn us, then shalt thou lift up thy face to God with boldness and not be afraid, as thou art now, to draw near to him. It is with that confidence that we come before him. It is that confidence that the beloved apostles counted on. It is not I, but Christ liveth in me. And I've often said, and perhaps young women need this more than older women, but there is no audience, there is no place that you could go in this entire world where a palace of a king or a great function in DC where the highest political realm may be on this earth at this particular time in this year, where you should not feel confident. You belong to the creator of the universe. You are an heir to the earth, an heir of all things in the earth, a joint heir with Jesus Christ our Lord. How dare we would ever feel less confident than someone who might know something about some political something. I don't know that anybody knows anything anymore, but it is the confidence that we get through him. He talks about how he maintains a constant communion with God, daily, hourly, monthly, in constant communion with God, constantly maintaining a conversation with God. Our calls to God in our prayers as we yearn to talk to him may be long and they may be often, but they are never burdensome or troublesome to God, ever. He is always willing, and he is managing the world. There's no telling what he's managing. I drive often and look up in the clouds and think, what must be going on up there? I mean, read Revelation, the victories that have already been won in the heavenly places, things we can't even imagine. You know, the Jews talked about the first heaven and the second heaven and the third heaven and the fourth heavens. And I am inclined to think that that might be exactly right. And God is managing and seeing and overseeing all of that. And when I stop and pray, he stops and looks at Ponte Vedra, Florida. That's who we are. That's the communion we have with God. And it's never too much for him. This is the approach to the throne under all the burdens, in all of our wants and all of our cares, in spite of our fears. We have this continued conversation ongoing. You know, I was leaving Germany about I don't know, I've been home about a week and a half, and I remember, so I got up that morning. I stayed at a hotel in the airport the night before I left, just so that nobody would have to take me to the airport early in the morning with school and all that. And I woke up that morning and I was praying to God and talking to him. And, you know, when you're by yourself, you can talk out loud, like you can just let it rip and you just talk about everything. And so I just thought, I'm just going to travel with you today because I was by myself, you know? And so I thought, what a great traveling companion. We'll just get on the plane together and we'll just talk, and I can talk to him all day and I can talk to him about anything. And so that's what kind of relationship we have with the creator of the universe. I mean, it's incredible to think about what we have in this relationship. Eliphaz is exactly right. This is what God's people maintain, that we maintain these relationships where we have these ongoing conversations. With God, we are never alone. I get that, you know, in Charles Swindoll book, one of the things that he was talking about with this part of he was talking about how this father had law of a girl who was 6 years old. They lost his wife, and so the mother of the child, and the child was he was putting the child to bed one night, and she was crying. He said, I'm just going to bring a little cot in here," and he brought a cot in and he laid beside her bed, and they were and he woke up. They fell asleep, and he woke up that night, and she was crying, and so he reached over and he held her hand, and she said, "I'm glad you stayed with me. I didn't want to be alone." He said, "But you know, you're never alone." She said, "I know, but I just really would like to have somebody that has skin." And I thought that was really sweet and interesting. And we get that. Oh, of course, you do. Just, I want somebody with skin. I get it. I know that. But I will tell you, it is awfully nice to know that you can have a traveling companion. And he will be there all the time with you. And you can talk to him anytime. And if you're good at talking to yourself like I am, it's great. It's great. He talks about how that he should have satisfaction in the activities of his life. If he were walking correctly with God, that he would have a satisfaction in the activities of his life. And we have this inward satisfaction of the affairs of each day. You should decree a thing and it should be established to you, he says. What you commit yourself to, you'll succeed in. That's what he's saying here. People who walk with God find that to be true, generally speaking. That there's a certainty, certainly here implications that if we commit ourselves, that's an action. We have to get up. That makes it harder. But we commit ourselves and we work, also an action, also hard sometimes. We have that determination. We establish, right? So that's an action as well. So we've got a lot of determination, a lot of wherewithal, our faith and our prayer, our love, our service to all things, direct guidance from God. God directs and guides, and success comes. It does. It comes. Maybe not great rewards in life. That's not what's being discussed here, I do not believe, but success at life. You ever been to a funeral that was so sad because there was nothing good to say or nothing to say and then just nothing left behind? And that you go to somebody who's lived faithfully before the Lord for 50 years. You go to that funeral. There's a lot to say about that. God's wisdom will be our guide. His favor then is our comfort, and our ways become the light that prospers. It is interesting. Some of the worst critics of others in their activity are those who never try to do anything. And I think that's what's being discussed here. It's easy to be critical if you have never tried. I've had a lot of failures in my life. There's not a lot of things that I haven't tried when I hear of them. In fact, I'm the very worst at volunteering for everything. And so there's a lot of failures that come with that. I mean, I still think I can do things. I might get it wrong the first time, but I will tell you that you will be much less critical of others and of efforts. You'll have a lot more patience if this encompasses you, and the successes will come. That he could have joy in his trials is discussed, so that even in the times of trial and calamity and danger, there is joy and hope. I truly believe that we are people who must not live bitter with anxiety. We must not be those who are defined by our tragedies. Judy and I have talked a lot about this in the last few, and our burdens, our disappointments. There's all kinds of things people define themselves by. Amika, we talk a lot. I mean, you get to a point where you're at a certain age and you never dreamed that you'd be in this situation or that this would be your circumstances. And we got to deal with it. And we have a culture full of victims, lots of victims in our world. You are not a victim of your circumstances. Job was not a victim. In fact, God never allowed Job to be a victim. He said, you get up and you worship me. You have no idea who I am. You have no idea how I created the world. You have no idea how I function. You have no idea how I think. You owe me worship. And so we mustn't become defined by our tragedies, victims of our circumstances. We are defined by our hope. Our hope. Can you imagine trying to bring somebody to Christ when we ourselves are living in bitterness and anger and sadness and moping and dragging ourselves around? There's no light provided by that. For our hope makes us happy, and our hope brings us joy. And it doesn't mean that I'm not sad. I can cry as soon as I think about my fare. But boy, when I think about the hope and the joy of seeing her again, then I have something to talk about. Then I have something to tell others about. And this is important, and Eliphaz was right. Isaiah speaks of this same sentiment. Isaiah 58, verse 14, one of my favorite verses. And even though among great defeat and great tribulation, Isaiah says that these people were going to have, he says, in the defeat and in the afflictions and in the tragedies, then you should delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth. I think it's a beautiful passage. Isn't that something? We're given the ability to see life and earth from the highest vantage point that there is. And that perspective gives us joy. It gives us strength. For we see not the muck and the mire that we're treading through, but the hope in the trial. It changes who you are completely. And I'll tell you, that's a perspective you have to have, or you won't make it. Because life will bring you things that are disappointing. That he should be a blessing to and do good to all is the final thought that Eliphaz has. And the outcome of all of this blessing and all of this understanding and all of this affliction and drawing yourself and having this relationship with God is that you can do good with it. And you can do good to so many. Eliphaz says it is then he will save the humble person. He will even deliver one who is not innocent. He even has the grace and the mercy to provide us with the ability to be righteous, even when we get something wrong, which, by the way, we do, and we will. Walking in the light is not walking and then hopping out and saying, oh no, don't let me die. Walking in the light is a continual motion of life. And God, and this is the sentiment Eliphaz says here, he will deliver one who is not even innocent. Yes, he will be delivered by the purity of your hands. We are not only those who do good to others, but we actually participate in the delivery of those who need to be directed to it. Amazing truths found in this final discussion of Eliphaz. He's concluded his thoughts correctly. He is accused wrongly. He has spoken some truths that are eliminated by his lack of knowledge in the overwhelming and unmatchable circumstances in which he has found himself. You know, just because there are foundational truths that we know and we remain sure in those, that does not mean that we always apply those correctly. Sometimes we just have to say, don't know. Don't know why this is happening. Don't understand it. I know some basic principles. We cannot assume to charge others who are struggling. We need to be sure that we don't become bullies. That's what these friends had become. They were bullies. That's really what had happened, just because we understand common truth. These friends were righteous when they came to Job. I believe that with all my heart. I think they were righteous men. They understood real, wonderful principles of God. They understood God. They, it seems, understood sacrifice. I think they were just like Job. I think we are talking about a time. It's a really interesting time, actually. This patriarchal period. My daughter and her husband have started a congregation in Spangdahlem, Germany, where they live. And there are many Sundays when they're by themselves. If others are out of town or deployed, or they have to go off. And I talked to her when I was over there. I worshiped with them 2 weeks. We went to one of the congregations that we had been at when we were there, and then I worshiped them in their home. And there were many days that Russ and I did the same thing when we started congregations in Germany as well. And I told her to study this period of time, because this was a period of time where God had given men the ability to understand how to worship him. And yet it appears that they worshiped, that the patriarch led the worship. They were the priest for the family. And we don't see indications that they gathered together. Now, I'm not saying that didn't happen, but we don't see any indications of that. These men led their families in worship to God, the creator of the universe. They knew God. They assumed the goodness of God. They understood communication with God. They understood faithfulness to God. They understood that God could forgive. But over the course of time, they had lost patience. That's what they lost. They lost patience with the situation. They lost patience with Job. They lost love and compassion in their words and their actions. And that's why I said perhaps this book is more about the friends than it is about Job for us. We must never take God's law and rule without love when we use it. James tells us, I mentioned this earlier, to hold up the hands of the weak. But be careful in your tone as you hold the hands of the weak up if you are trying to teach. Then Job answered and said, even today, my complaint is bitter. My hand is listless because of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where to find him, that I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in his great power? No, but he would take note of me. There the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. This is a really interesting passage for us, and one that I think we tread lightly on, because it is, in a sense, Job demanding a day in court. This is language of law that is used here. He is asking to appear before a judge. He would like to be tried. He would like to argue his case. He would like to litigate for himself. Scary place to be in. Now, we know that when God finally appears, Job doesn't say a word. In fact, he puts his hand over his mouth, we are told. Job never sins in all of this. And so he is walking this line of trying to figure this out. Perhaps since Eliphaz ends his discourse addressing the faithfulness of those who draw near to God, Job does not rebuke his friends as he has in the past as he begins to address them. He's confident in his relationship with God in this passage, so much so that he desires a day before him. I'll tell you what has happened to Job. What's happened to Job is that he knows that the earth is never going to judge him fairly. They don't know his heart.
Yeah.
His friends have assumed the intentions of his heart, and they're not right.
Right.
And so he knows that the only person, the only being that can judge fairly Job's heart is God. And so therefore, he almost demands. His words are, I do not complain more than there is cause. Even today, after all you have said to convince and comfort me, still the pains of my body and the wounds of my spirit, I have no answers for. I'm still bitter. The taste still remains. No, nothing has been answered. Nothing has been eliminated. And therefore, it is not the judgment of man, but the judgment of God that will suffice us in our misery. Though God will not see him as sinless, he will find the intentions of his heart as being righteous, Job says. He therefore will have to wait to meet God, no matter what men say. And it is in this fact that Job finds himself impatient for the day. He is impatient. This is impatient language. James expresses the same thing in James 5:7-9, that we hope for the judge's coming as we patiently wait in our afflictions and our trials. There is nothing sinful about this desire of Job. I will tell you, you ask somebody who has lived with an illness for 15 years, where they've had pain and treatment, and they long for the day that they die. And that is because that is where affliction takes us. It makes us yearn for something different, for something to see God. And so he is sure in God's judgment seat that things will be more fair. Matthew Henry says, a patient waiting for death and judgment is our wisdom and our duty. That's what we do. We patiently wait for death as we live our lives. And if we duly consider things, that cannot be without a holy fear and trembling. Sure, we understand that. It is fearful. And at the same time, we long for it. But a passionate wishing for death or judgment without such fear and trembling is our sin and folly, and ill becomes us. Job was rightfully wishing in his affliction. He knew that there would be no justice, no understanding without God's appearance. He needed God to appear. Job is sure of the goodness of God, and in a sense, he is sure of his own case. He knows that God will judge him more fairly than his friends have. Justice does not come in life, but in death. And we're going to discuss that at length. There is not going to be injustices are going to be there until the day we die, and they will continue to be here on earth as long as the earth remains. God does not deal with all injustices while men are living. It's not going to happen. And we don't need to understand that. We just have to have faith in that. Justice does not come in life, but in death. Justice will bring light that they, even Job, did not have. And Job knew that. Job says, I need God to come. Job knew that though he had sinned, and when he sins, he understood that God knew the intentions of his heart. I will produce evidences of the sincerity of my heart, walking in the light, judged by light. Doesn't mean that we get everything right. But Job felt confident, so much so that he looked forward to meeting God. He says that he will gladly hear what the Lord has to say. It'd be a lot easier than sitting and talking another day to his friends. I mean, his friends were driving him crazy. But God, if God says one thing or another, he says, I'm going to hear it and I'll understand and I'll be satisfied in what you tell me. And then the comfort of hope that God would deal favorably with him in this matter and in this situation. Job believed that God would not overpower him, but deal with him with absolute sovereignty, that he would allow him to plead for himself, and that he would support him to maintain his integrity. He had faith in the justice of God. We realize that judgment before God will not allow or require a trial. The judge will speak with absolute understanding and justice, but it will be just and it will be full of knowledge, and that is what Job hoped for here. I will be saved from the unjust censures of my friends and from the sentence that has been given to me here. And it is so true. God will right our wrongs. Vengeance is his. And that is what the sentiment that is being expressed here is. I'll go one more verse, one more section, and then we'll stop and continue next week. He says, look, I go forward, but he's not there. And backwards, I can't perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. And when he turns to the right hand, I can't see him. But he knows the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I come forth as gold. My foot is held fast to his steps. I've kept his ways and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. This is perhaps one of the most beautiful passages in the whole book. It is absolutely beautiful. It is the absolute trust that Job has in the Lord, though he can't find him. Job, in answer to Eliphaz's suggestion that he find God, is that he would love to. In fact, that's what he desires more than anything. God and only God would make sense of all of this. Oh, that God would come, he says. Oh, that God would answer us in times when we are not able to understand, when we are drowning and when we are overwhelmed. Oh, that he would. Job is confused and can't sort out his mind. He's at his wit's end. You think, Job says to Eliphaz, you think I don't want to see him? You think I haven't looked everywhere for him? I'm afflicted on every turn. And he already knows that God is the answer. But he also does not see the support of the answers in the silence. There's silence in the heavens. There's nobody answering. There's no answer for all this. And so he had no way to understand the source of his afflictions, knowing that his heart was sincere and full of integrity, that he had done none of the things that he had been accused of. He knew all of that. Where is God when we cannot make sense of our lives? Boy, is that a good question, right? He had talked extensively with his friends, considered all of their words, considered all of his ways, considered all of the affliction, considered all of the history that he knew, considered every experience he had had, everything that he had known to be truth. He had turned every way he could think of to figure this out. That's what he says. I go one way, he's not there. I go another way, it's not there. He had tried to live righteously. It was not true that he had been cruel. It was not true that he had been a hypocrite. He knew that his heart was righteous before God with God's grace and mercy. Matthew Henry says, and he could not foresee what would be in the end thereof, whether God would deliver him at all. He had no idea what the end would be. He had lost everything he owned. He had lost all of his children. He had lost all of his household. He had lost all of the respect and honor that he had been given. He had lost his health. He couldn't sleep. He was afflicted with pain. And he had looked everywhere. He didn't know if God would deliver him at all, nor did he know when or how he would do it. He saw no signs, nor was there any way to tell him how long. He was quite at a loss to know what God had designed to do with him. And whatever conjecture he might advance in his mind, still something or something else appeared. It wasn't working out the way that he perhaps he had laid in bed and thought, well, this will happen or that will happen. That somehow this would be the way this would work out. And so he is satisfied that God knows him. He has to just be satisfied that God knows him. Look at these verses. I can't find him. If he's working, I can't see it. And so I need to be satisfied that he knows me. Finally, after running in the maze of man's words and accusations, can you imagine what he has been spinning around for months, possibly years at this point? And so after running the maze of men's words and accusations and assumptions, he is exhausted, and God is the hope. And there's great comfort that though he may have gotten something wrong, that he had taken the good way. He says, he knows the way I take. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I can't find him, but he knows me, and he knows the way I take. And that I have tried, and that his refinement has made me stronger. Even in it, Job remains focused on the one that he cannot see. He says, my feet have held the steps. I've walked in the light, 1 John. I have been governed. I have been determined. I have not turned back. I have not wondered. I have held on, and I am excited to see him. That's the sentiments. Bring me before your court. Bring me in and let me answer you. Finally, the word of God is to our souls what our necessary food is to our bodies. It sustains the spiritual life and strengthens us for the actions of our lives. It is that which we cannot exist without, and which nothing else can make up for. And we ought, therefore, so to esteem it, to take pains for it, to hunger after it, to feed upon it with great delight. I will tell you that if you are not clinging to your scriptures, if you are not reading and studying and thriving to know him, striving to know him, you need to do that. It nourishes our souls. And this will be our rejoicing in the day of evil, as it was for Job. I'm going to end our class by reading just a little excerpt out of the book that Charles Swindoll wrote about Job. Though unable to locate the presence of God, Job states his trust in him. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, you can say whatever you wish against me. God knows the way I take. He knows the truth. He is my justifier. He and I are on speaking terms. I trust him. I believe him. And furthermore, after the trial is over and he has accomplished his purpose within me, I shall come forth as gold. You can count on that, my friend. When the trial has passed, you will be deeper and richer for it. Gold will replace alloy. I want you to allow those words to burn their way into your brain so deeply that they become like a divine filter for everything that happens to you in your life from this day forward. God knows the way you are taking. We talked about that. All of the conversation and all of the time, God is watching Job. Everything that Job says, everything that Job does, God is watching. Job is embracing God's word. It's more important than bread and water. Job states that he esteemed God's words more than anything that kept him alive. That explains this man's endurance. It helps us understand how he continued to demonstrate grace under pressure. And so can you. All right, we'll end there. Next week, I will start. I didn't get finished with my lesson. Go figure. How about that? All right, so we'll start here, finishing up with what Job said. We'll look at what Bildad says, and we'll continue on with what Job says. So let me stop recording.